Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show where we take a monumental figure from history, science, or culture, snack up all the sources, and give you the comprehensive, yet highly digestible, shortcut to knowing everything that matters.
Today we are opening the file on a man whose very identity has kept classicists arguing for over 2 millennia, Xenophon of Athens.
Right. And it's the ultimate case of ancient multiplicity, isn't it? Xenophon, born around 430 BC, he really did live several lives at once.
He absolutely did. Was he primarily a soldier, a tactician whose operational genius, foreshadowed Alexander the Great?
Or was he a serious historian picking up the pen directly, where the famously unfinished work of Thucydides just stops?
And this is the big one for a lot of history. Was he the dedicated philosopher, the essential second witness who preserved the moral teachings of Socrates?
And that question is so wonderfully loaded because the consensus has, it's shifted over the centuries. For a huge chunk of history, Xenophon was recognized not as a military leader, but primarily as a philosopher.
Yeah, you have writers like Quintilian in his guide The Orator's Education, who certainly knew about the military campaigns and all the histories.
But he firmly placed Xenophon right next to Plato as a philosophical source.
Exactly. He was the one who recorded the practical, the ethical Socrates.
And this enduring legacy is due not only to what he wrote, but how he wrote it.
Oh, absolutely. He wrote in this wonderfully clear, unadorned Attic Greek. It was so elegant, so accessible, that later generations, like Diogenes Laertius, they honored him with his title, the Attic Muse, for the sheer sweetness of his diction.
So if you were a student back in antiquity learning the language, Xenophon was basically your textbook.
He was your first read, yeah.
And that remarkable clarity makes his work universally accessible, but also, as we're about to see, a little deceptive in its simplicity.
That's a great point. He wrote the history of his time, but he did so as a deeply engaged and, let's be honest, often biased participant.
He gives us the view from the inside.
The view from the inside, whether that inside is the collapsing democracy of Athens, the widget oligarchy of Sparta, or the desperate command structure of a mercenary army marching across the Persian heartland.
So, our mission today is to truly unpack this tripod of identities.
We need to examine the general who revolutionized the system of military retreat, the historian who chronicled the downfall of Athens and the rise of Sparta, and of course the profound political philosopher who used fictionalized biography to offer a subtle, devastating critique of empire and unchecked power.
We're going to see Xenophon as the disillusioned Athenian who sought stability elsewhere.
And ultimately found flaws everywhere.
Okay, let's unpack the setting for this extraordinary life. Xenophon was born around 430 BC into the Athenian aristocracy. His father was Grillus.
Right. And this means his entire youth, his formative years, were utterly dominated by this massive, destructive 27-year war between Athens and Sparta, the Peloponnesian War.
It wasn't just a political backdrop for him.
No, not at all. It was the air he breathed. He's born into one of the wealthiest families in the Deme of Urkia, and he grows up watching Athenian democracy in its greatest expansion and its greatest folly just self-destruct.
And the sources make it pretty clear that he wasn't just a spectator.
No, he lived through and often participated in the immense political turbulence of that era.
And what turbulence it was. Think about the rapid-fire disasters and reversals he saw firsthand before he was even 30.
It's staggering. He witnesses the spectacular, if brief, return of Alcibiades in 407 BC, which must have felt like this massive moment of hope for some people.
But then almost immediately, the catastrophic naval battle at Arginusae.
Followed by the terrible and, frankly, illegal trial of the generals in 406 BC, which alienated basically the entire Athenian elite.
That trial was a huge turning point, wasn't it?
It was a watershed moment. It signaled that the Democratic Assembly could be driven by mass hysteria and political manipulation, essentially sacrificing its own successful generals to scapegoat for poor management.
So for a young guy with aristocratic sensibilities like Xenophon,
it confirmed everything. The inherent instability and injustice of radical democracy.
And the climax of this political whiplash, of course, is the total defeat of Athens in 404 BC, followed by the installation of that brutal oligarchic regime, the 30 Tyrants.
And here's where we get concrete evidence of Xenophon's political leanings. The sources indicate that during the civil war that followed, when the democratic insurgents rallied against the 30, Xenophon actively fought on the side of the oligarchy.
Wow, so that's a critical detail. He wasn't just some moderate. He actively opposed the restoration of the democracy that defined his birthplace.
He did. And that association with the losing anti-democratic faction is really the first key to understanding his eventual alienation and his exile.
But even as all this political drama was unfolding, he was developing intellectually, as was, standard for young men of his class.
Right. And this is where his life changes forever, the connection to Socrates.
This is the defining personal relationship of his life, and we have this perfect little story about how it began, thanks to Diogenes Laertius.
It's a great story. It's a moment of physical interruption by the great philosopher.
The famous anecdote. So Xenophon is walking through the city, probably preoccupied with aristocratic matters.
And Socrates literally stops him, using his walking stick to block the narrow path. And he asks him this really simple question, forcing Xenophon to stop and engage. Where are necessary things sold?
And Xenophon answers, right. He lists the markets, the places of commerce.
And then Socrates asks the profound question, where are men made good and virtuous?
And when Xenophon honestly has to admit that he doesn't know the answer,
Socrates delivers the invitation that changed history. Follow me then and learn.
it's so immediate, so compelling, and it beautifully encapsulates the difference between the two primary Socratic witnesses.
Absolutely. While Plato was drawn to the grand metaphysics, the forms, the abstract ideals,
Xenophon captured Socrates, the moralist, the ethical guide, the man who is fundamentally concerned with making men good through practical discipline and inquiry.
and this philosophical education only heightened Xenophon's existing aristocratic and anti-democratic biases.
Of course. The Athenian elite often viewed the chaos of democracy as a failure of virtue.
And their teacher, Socrates, was eventually executed by that same democracy. For Xenophon, the institutions of Athens had failed both politically and morally.
Which brings us to the ultimate, inescapable paradox of his life, the Spartan paradox. You have this Athenian aristocrat, philosophically educated in the greatest city-state, who becomes the primary ally and chronicler of Sparta, Athens' mortal enemy and the very power that crushed Athenian freedom.
And the sources confirm this was more than just political convenience. It was intellectual admiration. Xenophon was looking for stability. He saw the corruption and volatility of Athens, and he contrasted it with the perceived order and severe discipline of the Lacedaemonian system.
And this is our tremendous stroke of luck as historical beneficiaries.
It is. Much of what we know about classical Spartan society, its unique institutions, its training systems, its kings, it comes directly from the writings of an Athenian expatriate who had an outsider's critical eye, but an insider's access.
His treatise, Constitution of the Lacedaemonians, is probably the most critical text on Spartan life.
It is, and it opens with that telling sentiment where he states he initially wondered why Sparta, though among the most thinly populated of states, was evidently the most powerful and most celebrated city in Greece.
The key phrase being,
But when I considered the institutions of the Spartans, I wondered no longer. He was fascinated by their success, determined to sort of reverse engineer the political technology that created it.
and his biography of King Agesilaus II further cements his loyalty, painting the Spartan king as this ideal leader.
Right. This intellectual and military allegiance eventually led to his permanent exile. But before that, Xenophon embarked on a military adventure that would transform him from Socrates' student into one of the most celebrated battlefield commanders of the ancient world.
And he had to cross an entire continent to earn that military reputation.
An entire continent.
Okay, here's where the story takes that sharp turn east, a story that defines the military side of his legacy. It's 401 BC.
And Xenophon's friend, Proxenus of Boeotia, a captain leading Greek mercenaries, invites him to sail to Ephesus.
But this wasn't really meant to be a military career move for Xenophon, was it?
Not at all. He goes simply as a friend and advisor to Proxenus. He actually claims in his account, the Anabasis, that Socrates was wary of the trip and advised him to consult the oracle at Delphi.
Right, but Xenophon, being eager to go, he only asked the oracle which gods he should sacrifice to for a successful journey.
Not whether he should go. Socrates later, chastised him for predetermining the outcome.
So he's already acting like a man who knows what he wants despite his philosophical training. And the political deception surrounding this expedition is it's magnificent.
It is. The stated reason for the whole thing was fighting Tissaphernes, a regional Persian satrap who was being a nuisance.
So the Greek mercenaries, the 10,000, they thought they were hired for a local skirmish in Ionia.
Exactly. Xenophon and the whole army were thoroughly misled.
They were marching thousands of miles inland, all the way to Tarsus before the real goal was revealed.
Which was not a border skirmish. It was a massive civil war.
A civil war.
Correct. Cyrus the Younger, the prince they were fighting for, intended to depose his older brother, King Artaxerxes II, the great king of the Achaemenid Empire.
And this revelation caused immediate panic.
Total panic and refusal among the troops, who realized they were now thousands of miles deep in hostile territory, marching to face the full might of the Persian crown.
It's the ultimate bait and switch, and the whole enterprise culminates at the Battle of Cunaxa in 401 BC.
The battle itself was a tactical draw, but a strategic disaster. The Greek phalanx won decisively against the Persian left flank, but Cyrus, in a reckless act, charged directly at his brother the king.
And was killed.
He was killed. And with Cyrus dead, the goal of the campaign just vanishes instantly. The 10,000 had won the battle but lost the war.
And then comes the act of treachery that turns the entire story into a desperate survival epic.
It's perhaps the most infamous betrayal in ancient history. The Greek generals, including Xenophon's friend Proxenus and the Spartan general Clearchus, were invited by Tissaphernes, who pretended to negotiate a peaceful passage home to a feast.
And they were captured and promptly executed.
Leaving the 10,000 leaderless, stranded near Mesopotamia, and surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces who were now actively pursuing them.
And this is the moment. This is where the philosopher becomes the general in this desperate chaos who organizes the new command structure.
Xenophon is elected as one of the new leaders. Suddenly, the Athenian intellectual who barely knew why he had sailed to Ephesus is now responsible for navigating 10,000 highly trained but terrified Greek soldiers on a 1,500-mile march through enemy territory back toward the Black Sea.
And this journey is the subject of his memoir, Anabasis, The Going Up.
Yes. And the brilliance isn't just surviving, it's how they survived. This retreat is considered a revolution in tactical warfare. The military historian Theodore Errol Dodge didn't mince words.
He called Xenophon the father of the system of retreat.
He did. Dodge argued that the genius displayed by Xenophon in organizing this long retreat was never truly surpassed.
Yeah.
And the sources show that Xenophon was forced to innovate immediately, adapting on the fly to Persian tactics.
Okay, so what was his first immediate problem?
The harassing Persian missile cavalry. They were constantly peppering the Greek flanks and rear, taking advantage of the Greek hoplites' lack of light missile-capable protection.
So what's his solution?
It was immediate and decisive. He reorganized the existing remaining troops. The sources indicate he formed a dedicated mobile body of archers and light cavalry. Critically, these were not just gathered. They were organized as a new tactical counterforce.
And it worked.
The very next day, when the Persian cavalry approached, Xenophon unleashed this specialized force, and they successfully routed the Persians. It was the first instance of a Greek general establishing an effective standing counter to enemy light forces.
It's astonishing how quickly he applied practical solutions. He didn't just stop there, though. He redefined the internal structure of the fighting force.
Yeah, within the main phalanx formation, the heavy infantry Xenophon is credited as the first to establish a dedicated tactical reserve.
A reserve force. What does that mean in this context?
This force was placed in the rear of the main line, and its entire purpose was not to march or fight routinely, but to be ready, mobilized, and instantly deployable to reinforce any weak parts of the line that started to buckle under enemy pressure.
For an audience today, a tactical reserve is fundamental military doctrine. But in ancient warfare, where the phalanx was often just a solid block of men, this concept of a flexible, mobile reserve was truly revolutionary.
It injected elasticity into a rigid structure.
And then there was the necessity of surviving relentless pursuit, which forced him into the most brutal of innovations.
The scorched earth policy. Dodge, again, noted that this was the first time a general had systematically used the devastation of the countryside, destroying villages and crops, to deprive a pursuing enemy of food and shelter, thereby stopping their advance.
It's ruthless, but absolutely essential when you are the moving target and have no supply train. It's the cost of survival.
And the necessity of innovation even extended to engineering. They were pursued and faced the massive obstacle of the Great Zab River, and the sources revealed the desperate measures they considered.
Tell us again about that bizarre, discarded plan to cross the river.
A man proposed they slaughter every animal they had, all the cows, goats, sheep, and donkeys, stuff the carcasses with hay, sew them up, and attempt to lay them across the river, covering them with dirt to make a floating bridge.
A bridge made of dead animals. Seriously.
The audacity of the improvisation is incredible.
It just speaks volumes about their situation. They were truly operating on the razor's edge.
Thankfully, they managed to discard that plan as impractical and eventually found a better way across.
The physical journey itself reads like something out of high fantasy, particularly their passage through the mountainous territory of the Carduchians in modern southeastern Turkey.
This was historically known as death trap territory. The sources emphasize the historical warning. The great king himself had once sent an army of 120,000 men into that area to subdue the Carduchians.
And not a single soldier ever returned home.
Not one. So for Xenophon's depleted 10,000, numbering maybe 10,000 fighting men, this was the moment of truth.
So how does he navigate this impossible terrain against a hostile, fierce, and historically undefeated mountain tribe?
With classic maneuver warfare, its operational genius, the main Carduchian force was positioned perfectly, blocking the major pass.
So Xenophon ordered the vast majority of his army, 8,000 men, to conduct a visible loud feint at the main defile, keeping the enemy pinned.
Right. And meanwhile, using intelligence from a captured prisoner, he took a smaller force of 2,000 men and, under the cover of a rainstorm, marched them to a secret, unguarded pass.
He is using deception, intelligence, and even the weather to create a decisive advantage.
By daylight, the smaller force was positioned to flank the main Carduchian host, forcing them to divide their defenses and exposing their weak points. Xenophon achieved what 120,000 men couldn't. He successfully passed through the Carduchian lands through mobility and surprise, with minimal losses.
Eventually, after navigating more hostile forces and enduring an absolutely brutal winter march through Armenia, where the sources describe them being totally unprepared with clothing, they reached the coast.
And we get that eternal moment of relief. Their arrival at Treatises on the Black Sea coast, the famous shout, Thalata, Thalata!
The sea, a moment of pure, collective, desperate joy.
Knowing they were finally back in sight of Greek trade routes.
But even standing by the sea, they weren't done. They had one final major battle against the Colchians.
And this final engagement gave Xenophon one last chance to showcase his mastery of deployment. He observed the Colchians attempting to overlap his lines, which was a standard tactic for numerically superior forces.
So Xenophon decided to proactively counteract this by deploying his own hoplite line, extremely thin.
So thin, in fact, that it overlapped the enemy's flanks.
That seems incredibly risky, thinning your line on purpose.
It was a calculated risk. By forcing the enemy to spread their army to cover the overlap, Xenophon deliberately engineered a weakness in the Colchian center. He then rushed his tactical reserves into that newly created gap, shattering the enemy formation.
It was a textbook application of using geometry and maneuver to defeat a more numerous opponent.
The entire retreat, captured in Anabasis, is more than a memoir. It's truly a foundational document in military history.
So what's the ultimate legacy of this experience?
Its greatest legacy is the operational template it provided. It proved definitively that highly trained, motivated Greek heavy infantry could penetrate deep into the seemingly limitless Achaemenid Empire and not only survive, but conquer their way out.
And the sources confirm that Xenophon's Anabasis became essential reading.
It was used as a field guide by Alexander the Great during the early phases of his own expedition into Persia just over 60 years later. Xenophon mapped the route and provided the tactical blueprints for the greatest conqueror of the ancient world.
The military adventure ends, but the story of the man continues. Xenophon and the remaining 10,000 eventually make their way back to Greek lands, but they are still battle-hardened mercenaries.
Right. They helped local rulers, including Socrates II in Thrace, before ultimately committing themselves to Sparta, joining the Spartan general Thimbron in Pergamon around 399 BC.
And this is the critical period where his alliance with Sparta becomes formal and permanent, providing him with the stability and material necessary to start writing his histories.
This decision leads directly to the creation of his major historical work, Hellenica.
I think many people know him as the one who picked up the pen after Thucydides, right? Where exactly does the Hellenica begin and end? And what does it tell us about his perspective?
The Hellenica starts with a really striking sentence, designed for seamless continuity. It begins directly after the final incomplete sentence of Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian War.
So Thucydides' account ends abruptly around 411 BC.
And Xenophon picks up the narrative, covering the last 7 years of the war, 411-404 BC, and then chronicles the subsequent 4 decades of Spartan supremacy, concluding in 362 BC.
So he provides the full history of his native city's defeat and the ensuing 40 years of Greek turmoil. But the nature of his historical work is very different from Thucydides, isn't it?
Oh, fundamentally so. Thucydides was the scientific historian, concerned with causation, separating myth from fact, aiming for objective political analysis.
And Xenophon is what? A narrative historian.
Exactly. He's focused on action, character, and moral lessons, and he is also transparently biased.
Bias is inevitable, I suppose. But Xenophon was writing from a deeply personal place, often defending the actions of the Spartans or the generals he admired, like Agesilaus.
Absolutely. The Hellenica is often criticized for its pro-Spartan tilt, or for omitting events that might embarrass Sparta or his allies. However, its value is immense because it covers a period that would otherwise be nearly blank. He gives us the detailed political maneuvering during the rise and fall of Spartan supremacy.
And he also continued his service in the field, even as he was likely compiling these notes. After Thimbron failed to capture Larissa, the Spartans replaced him with Ducilius.
And Xenophon serves brilliantly under Ducilius. This command change led to a highly successful campaign where Xenophon and the army captured 9 cities in Aeolus in a period of only 8 days.
9 cities in 8 days. That astounding tempo speaks to the quality of the Greek forces, but also to Ducilius's effective command.
It does. And this success leads to the Spartan ephors finally clearing the 10,000 of any previous wrongdoing, essentially legitimizing their mercenary status and incorporating them fully into the Spartan war machine.
And there is that great anecdote about the shift in performance.
It's a perfect commentary on leadership. The commander of the 10,000, whether it was Xenophon or one of his peers, addressed the Spartan authorities, explaining the difference between the failure under Thimbron and the success under Ducilius.
Right, he said. We are the same men now as we were last year, but the commander now is one man, Ducilius, and in the past was another, Thimbron.
And he concludes, therefore you are at once able to judge for yourselves the reason why we are not at fault now, although we were then.
It's a concise thesis statement on the primacy of leadership. The quality of the troops is secondary to the quality of the general.
This must have reinforced Xenophon's burgeoning political philosophy about the ideal ruler. It certainly did. This period led to his most loyal service, joining the campaign of King Agesilaus II.
And he served under Agesilaus from 396 to 394 BC, traveling back with him to mainland Greece for the pivotal conflict with Athens and Thebes.
This was the decision that sealed his fate. He fought on the Spartan side against his native city in the Battle of Coronea in 394 BC.
The final unforgivable act.
Athens formally banished him for treasonously fighting against them. Xenophon was now permanently in exile, a man without a city, having chosen Spartan order over Athenian democracy.
But his exile was comfortable, at least initially. He follows Agesilaus' march back to the Peloponnese and is granted an estate in Silis, near the sacred site of Olympia.
And this is a 23-year period of enforced leisure, and it's arguably the most productive time of his life as a writer. This is where he writes the Polity of the Lacedaemonians, his royal biography Agesilaus, and all his highly practical, philosophical, and political works.
He spends his time raising his family, hunting, writing. He transforms from the active soldier into the reflective political theorist.
But even this peaceful period is interrupted by the volatile shifts of Greek power. The shifting sands of power, indeed. In 371 BC, Sparta suffers a decisive defeat against Thebes at the Battle of Leuctra.
Spartan power collapses.
And the Aelians, sensing weakness in the region, confiscate Xenophon's estate at Silis. He loses his home and his land.
The second exile, a quieter disaster.
According to Diogenes Laertius, Xenophon moves to Corinth, where he spends his final years, likely dying there around 355 or 354 BC, having witnessed the complete rise and fall of the powers he served and admired, Athens, Sparta, and Cyrus's empire.
His incredible trajectory speaks to a man seeking political stability and ethical guidance in a world defined by constant turmoil.
Precisely.
So now we grapple with the Xenophon who has moved beyond history and memoir and into deep political theory. This takes us to the Cyropedia, the education of Cyrus.
It's arguably his most ambitious and complex work, frequently cited as the conceptual archetype for the European Mirror of Princes genre text, designed to provide a moral and practical education for future rulers.
It's basically political fiction disguised as history.
That's a great way to put it. He takes Cyrus the Great, the actual founder of the First Persian Empire, and creates an idealized composite figure. This Cyrus is lofty, temperate, wise, educated, and essentially free of the typical corruption and petty jealousies that plague human leaders.
He's outlining the perfect autocrat.
He is. But the very act of creating an ideal ruler requires Xenophon to take historical liberties. And this is where the debate surrounding his political intent really begins, particularly concerning his divergence from Herodotus's historical account.
Okay, so give us the specifics on that historical contradiction, particularly concerning the Medes and the Persians.
Herodotus, the earlier historian, had established the generally accepted narrative. Cyrus the Great rebelled against his maternal grandfather, Astyages, who was the king of Media. Cyrus won, and the Medes were consequently conquered and became slaves to the Persians.
So a brutal, conquering empire.
Exactly. But Xenophon, writing decades later, offers a dramatically different narrative in Cyropedia. In his version, Astyages dies and is succeeded by Cyaxares II, Cyrus's maternal uncle.
And crucially, Xenophon presents the Medes as still being a major, powerful, independent kingdom led by Cyaxares.
Right, with Cyrus leading the Persians as a crucial but junior partner. They form an alliance to fight the Babylonians, which suggests partnership, not conquest.
So why bother changing that detail? If he's writing historical fiction to praise a leader, why disrupt the accepted history of conquest?
Because Xenophon is setting the stage for a subtle internal critique. He wants the Persian Empire to appear founded on alliance and consent, which allows him to analyze how even a consent-based, brilliantly led empire fails.
But what's fascinating is that external evidence, unearthed much later, suggests Xenophon's version of the Medes' power might not be entirely fictional. You're referring to the Heron Stele.
Yes. This Babylonian document, dating to around 540 BC, mentions the kings of the Medes as major enemies of Nabonidus, the Babylonian king.
And the critical part is that this reference suggests the Medes were still functioning as a major independent power just before Babylon fell.
They weren't slaves of the Persians for 2 decades, as Herodotus claimed. It suggests Xenophon might have been working from a different, perhaps Babylonian or Median, source that viewed the two powers as more equal partners in the conquest of Babylon.
Regardless of the historical accuracy, though, it allows Xenophon to build the foundation for his real argument.
Which is, if the empire is founded on virtue and partnership, yet still collapses, the problem must lie with the concept of empire itself.
And that's the key scholarly interpretation, right? Championed by Leo Strauss and later David Johnson. They argue Xenophon uses this lavish praise of Cyrus to hide a profound critique of the very idea of expansive dominion.
A critique aimed at the ambitions of Athens, Sparta, and Persia alike.
But wait, if he's praising Cyrus so lavishly throughout the entire work, how can we be sure he isn't just offering genuine, sincere leadership advice? Isn't that critique interpretation reliant on reading between the lines a little too much?
It is reliant on reading between the lines, but the textual clues are highly specific and highly symbolic. Take the symbolism that Johnson identifies in a specific passage where Cyrus institutionalizes cavalry.
Right. Cyrus states he wants every noble Persian to be seen only on horseback, never on foot, so that the composite image is always that of a centaur.
A centaur, a mythological figure that embodies the unstable dichotomy of man and beast. Xenophon, the ultimate Athenian intellectual, is choosing an image that was used in post-Persian War Greek propaganda, the centauromachy, to symbolize conflict and instability.
So he's saying this empire looks glorious, but its foundation is fundamentally unstable and hybrid.
That's the argument. The centaur symbolizes the volatile alliance of the Persians and the Medes, held together only by Cyrus's singular, overwhelming personality. By showing the empire's swift decline immediately after Cyrus's death, a historical fact Xenophon himself admits, he demonstrates that empires inherently lack stability. They rely entirely on a single person of remarkable prowess.
The implicit critique is devastating. If even the ideal leader cannot create a lasting, stable institution, then perhaps the institution itself is flawed. It's a warning against imperial ambition, regardless of whether that ambition is democratic, like Athens, or oligarchic, like Sparta.
And the critique goes even deeper, targeting the corruption of the elite under imperial rule, which relates to the transition from homotomoi to ontomoi.
Okay, break that down for us. What does it actually mean?
Homotomoi literally means peers, or equal honors. These were the original elite heavy infantry of the Persians, educated and rigorously trained, who initially shared the spoils of war equally based on their status. They were the educated meritocratic core.
But as Cyrus expanded and faced overwhelming numbers, he had to arm the commoners with the same heavy infantry gear, which essentially leveled the military playing field.
Exactly. This immediately sparked an argument over how to split the spoils, and Cyrus, wanting to reward bravery, enforced a strict meritocracy based purely on battlefield performance.
Which sounds fair on the surface rewarding skill. But Xenophon suggests it actually causes the system to rot. How?
Because the homotomoi realized that their specialized military training was no longer the sole advantage, their difference now lay primarily in their education and status. When meritocracy became purely performance-based, they lost their status advantage.
So they realized that the way to achieve honor, timo, was no longer through adherence to their educational principles.
But through directly ingratiating themselves to the emperor for positions, honors, and rewards.
So they stop being peers operating under a shared code and start becoming flatterers.
Precisely. They transition from homogumoi, equal honors, to untomoi, having to begin to get the honor. Xenophon shows how the concentration of reward structures in the hands of the single autocrat forces the elite to become courtiers and sycophants rather than virtuous peers,
Which guarantees the long-term instability and corruption of the regime.
proving that even the most benevolent autocracy eventually leads to decay.
That's a stunning realization, especially coming from a man who served Spartan kings and worked alongside autocrats. Xenophon used the ideal leader to demonstrate the inevitable failure of centralized power.
It connects right back to his life experience. He saw Athenian democracy corrupted by mass whim, Spartan oligarchy corrupted by hubris, and now, through Cyrus, the absolute failure of imperial virtue to sustain itself after the death of the singular genius.
We owe Xenophon a huge debt, not just for history and political theory, but for our fundamental understanding of his teacher. If Plato's works vanished, Xenophon's Socratic writings would be essential for us to truly comprehend Socrates.
Oh, they're absolutely foundational. We have his primary Socratic works, the Memorabilia, which acts as a defense of Socrates outside of the courtroom, detailing his moral principles and arguing he never corrupted the era.
And the Apology, Xenophon's version of Socrates' defense during the trial itself.
And the Apology is where we encounter one of the most intriguing debates in classical philosophy. The stark difference between the Xenophon's and Plato's depiction of Socrates' demeanor during the trial.
This is a point that requires careful consideration because Xenophon wasn't actually in Athens for the trial.
No, he was already on campaign in Anatolia with Cyrus. However, his account asserts that Socrates appeared exceedingly arrogant in court, perhaps even actively striving for death.
Striving for death, why would Xenophon suggest his revered teacher was almost challenging the jury to condemn him?
Xenophon posits that Socrates, having lived a long, morally upright, and philosophically rigorous life, felt that death was the preferred outcome over any form of compromise or continued existence in a world he deemed unjust.
So for Xenophon, the defense wasn't a genuine attempt to win freedom, but a final rhetorical demonstration.
A refusal to beg the jury and a choice to leave the world on his own terms, preserving his intellectual integrity.
So he viewed Socrates' failure to mount a fully convincing defense not as a tactical error, but as a deliberate, powerful rhetorical choice, a final, grand philosophical statement.
Precisely. Plato, who was present at the trial, felt compelled to soften that perceived arrogance. Plato's Socrates presents a high moral standard, but frames it more as an inescapable consequence of living a virtuous life rather than a willful embrace of death.
Xenophon's depiction suggests a more dramatic, almost theatrical conclusion, designed to emphasize Socrates' absolute moral superiority over his judges.
Right. And beyond the drama of the trial, Xenophon gives us access to Socrates' more grounded, practical side, moving away from abstract metaphysics.
The best example is the Economicus,
which is a Socratic dialogue that is focused entirely on practical household management, estate finances, and the principles of agriculture. It shows Socrates engaging with the everyday concerns of an Athenian gentleman, demonstrating that philosophy extended to efficiency and good stewardship.
Then there is the Symposium, a different kind of banquet from Plato's version.
Xenophon's Symposium is a dialogue where Socrates and his companions discuss what attributes they take pride in. While highly philosophical, it also contains a frank discussion concerning the nature of loving relationships, specifically noble versus base relationships, which included the dynamics between a wealthy aristocrat and a young boy present at the banquet.
It explores the moral boundaries and ethics of desire and pride.
Yes. And finally, the hero, which must have resonated deeply with Xenophon after his exposure to Cyrus and Ogyges.
The Hero is a fascinating discussion between Hero, the tyrant of Syracuse, and the famous lyric poet Simonides of Chios.
And they debate the nature of happiness, questioning whether absolute political power, the life of the tyrant, truly leads to happiness, or if it leads to inescapable fear, isolation, and misery. It serves as a philosophical justification for Xenophon's political skepticism found in the Cyropedia.
It's crucial to remember that Xenophon wrote many of these works during his 23 years of enforced leisure and retirement on his estate in Sicily.
And those years, dedicated to the pursuits of the aristocratic country gentleman, gave rise to his short, practical treatises. This is Xenophon, the man of action, applying his rigorous analytical mind to his favorite hobbies.
He compiled what we might call the ultimate gentleman's reading list for the classical world, starting with his passion for horses.
Absolutely. He wrote On Horsemanship, which is a detailed manual on how to break, train, and care for horses, a testament to his cavalry experience, and Hipparchikos, a treatise specifically outlining the duties, strategies, and responsibilities of a cavalry officer.
And his love of the country life is preserved in Hunting with Dogs.
The Synergeticus, which details the proper methods and advantages of hunting, not just as a sport, but as a moral discipline that prepares men for war and provides wholesome aristocratic leisure.
It's a unified worldview, a blend of Socratic discipline and Spartan rigor applied to the practical matters of life and warfare.
Even in his final years, after his estate was confiscated, he never stopped trying to influence governance. He wrote Ways and Means, a treatise discussing practical solutions for Athens to deal with financial and economic crises. He was trying to advise the city that had banished him.
He was a political animal to the end. Before we conclude, we should briefly clarify one historical misconception: the treatise Constitution of the Athenians, which was once attributed to him.
That's the one we know was written by the old oligarch. Modern scholarship is certain Xenophon didn't write it, primarily because it was written when he was only about 5 years old.
It's an interesting counterpoint, though.
It is. That document critiques Periclean institutions, but ironically argues they were perfectly designed for their purpose, serving the political and economic interests of the poorer classes. But Xenophon was not the author of that particular cynical early critique.
So what does this extraordinary trajectory tell us about the man known as the Attic Muse? We have followed him from the politically chaotic streets of Athens to the deserts of Mesopotamia, from the fields of Cyrus to the Spartan courts.
He was the quintessential utility player of antiquity.
He was the military leader who revolutionized the tactical retreat, the philosopher who captured the moral core of Socrates, and the historian who provided the crucial bridge for Greek history after Thucydides.
His ability to synthesize moral philosophy with battlefield pragmatism is truly unparalleled.
And in his political theory, he used the image of Cyrus the Great to subtly warn us. He demonstrated that no matter how virtuous, no matter how disciplined, expansive empires and highly centralized power structures are inherently unstable and prone to corruption and decay.
His ideas on leadership, particularly those found in Cyropedia, linking a strong moral code and education to effective rule, are why he's still studied intensely today by students of political science and military strategy.
He forced his readers to question not just the leader, but the system itself. He lived through the collapse of Athens' democracy, the failure of Spartan oligarchy, and observed firsthand the ultimate limits of boundless expansion in Persia.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider as you reflect on Xenophon's immense legacy.
He was permanently banished by his birthplace, Athens, for fighting alongside Sparta. He spent his long life writing about the ideal leader, Cyrus, and the ideal state, Sparta, both of whom ultimately failed spectacularly to maintain long-term stability.
He had detailed, intimate exposure to the political failures of every major system of governance in the classical world democracy, oligarchy, and expansive empire. So, what lesson was Xenophon really trying to teach us?
Was he advocating for one flawed system over the others, or was he simply concluding that political stability is ultimately impossible without the constant, active, and highly exceptional presence of a single virtuous man?
And if the latter is true, if true stability is purely reliant on the unique genius of a single, irreplaceable person, what hope do we have for designing sustainable long-term institutions today that don't immediately devolve into corruption and conflict when that single genius inevitably leaves the stage?
Think about that paradox of genius versus system as you continue your own deep dive into the histories of the ancient world. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.